their pets and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed. Hello there, it's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. National insurance rises took effect today, of course. The Tories finally tackling the issue of how on earth we're going to pay for social care. Many people are saying that now is not the time. But if not now, then when? That's what I want to know. Also today, the biggest change in divorce laws in half a century sees an end to the blame game for couples wishing to split amicably. Again, it's been criticised by some, saying it makes it too easy to walk away from marriage and undermines the sanctity of the institution of marriage. What do you reckon to that? And also today, there's been further NATO meetings with Ukraine, which means, you guessed it, more sanctions for Russia. Britain, the US and the EU have all unveiled new measures. But hang on a minute, they don't actually seem to be making that much difference, do they? And finally, how do you stop people being obese? Well, starting today, restaurant chains are going to be adding calories to their menus. Is it going to make a difference, though, to what you order when you go out for your dinner? We'll have all that to come, but first, the latest news headlines.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says the 1.25% rise in national insurance is unquestionably right for our country and the NHS. The increase means Britain's tax burden has now risen to its highest point in 70 years, impacting the income of millions of households. The government predicts £39 billion will be raised over the next 3 years. Boris Johnson says it will help reduce the NHS waiting lists.
The most important thing is to have a strong, robust economy in which you have a high level of security in your employment, in which people know that there's a long-term plan to deliver jobs and growth.
Boris Johnson there. Meanwhile, the Chancellor's popularity with voters has declined as the cost of living continues to soar. A YouGov survey found Rishi Sunak's net favourability has dropped 24 points in the last fortnight since he made the spring statement. Earlier, campaigners dressed up as the Chancellor outside the Treasury office in London, protesting the rise in national insurance. A security guard at the British Embassy in Berlin suspected of spying for Russia has been extradited from Germany to the UK. David Smith was arrested by German police last August and is accused of collecting information to pass on to the Russian state. The 57-year-old is expected to appear in Westminster Magistrates Court tomorrow. Vladimir Putin's daughters are among those being sanctioned by the US over Russia's alleged war crimes in Ukraine. In a new round of sanctions announced this afternoon, the US says it is targeting Russian financial institutions as well as Kremlin officials and their family members. The Russian president's 2 adult daughters are the latest to be named. The Secretary-General of NATO has thanked the US for what he called outstanding leadership in the face of the war in Ukraine. Welcoming the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the latest NATO summit in the last half hour, Jens Stoltenberg has said the efforts from the US have been indispensable. Speaking ahead of a meeting of foreign ministers, Mr. Stoltenberg says he believes war crimes have been committed.
We have all seen the atrocities that have been committed in Bucha and other places in Ukraine. This reveals the true nature of President Putin's war. Any targeting and killing of civilians is a war crime, and therefore NATO allies are supporting the international efforts to establish all the facts, to investigate and to make sure that perpetrators are punished.
Jens Stoltenberg there. Well, earlier the Ukrainian president spoke to the Irish Parliament and called for more sanctions. Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is using hunger as a weapon and deliberately creating a food crisis.
I'd like to ask you to convince EU partners to introduce even more rigid sanctions against Russia that would really make sure that the Russian war machine will stop. The only thing is that we're lacking is the principal approach of some leaders, political leaders, business leaders, who still think that war and war crimes is not something as horrific as financial losses.
The Prime Minister says biological males should not compete in women's sports. Speaking during a visit to a hospital, Boris Johnson said to him it seems sensible. It's after he defended the government's decision not to include trans people in the proposed ban on conversion therapy. He added there were complexities and sensitivities which needed to be worked through. P&O Ferries says it's getting ready to resume services on suspended routes from this weekend. It's after 800 workers were sacked on March the 17th and key trips had to be cancelled. The journeys back in action will include the Dover to Calais and the Hull to Rotterdam crossings. And Ed Sheeran has called for the end of baseless claims against songwriters. Today he won a High Court battle in the copyright case of his single Shape of You. Ed Sheeran has insisted he's always tried to be completely fair in crediting people who contribute to his albums. Posting on social media after the verdict, the singer said claims like this are too common and damaging to the songwriting industry. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that. Well, keep me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel got Lucy Harris, who's a former Conservative MEP, Dr. Lee Jones, who's Professor of Political Economy and International Relations, and Peter Edwards, who's the former editor of Labour List. And you know the drill on Dewbs & Co by now. It's not just about us, it's about you as well at home. What is on your mind tonight? What's your thoughts on all the topics and anything else? What should we be talking about, do you think, that we're not? Get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well. I don't know why I stay on Twitter, you know. What an awful place it can be sometimes. Do you use Twitter? If you do, what do you think to it? Nonetheless, I'm on there, and if you want to contact me, you can get me at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to our YouTube page. We've got an app. We're on the radio, DAB+. We're everywhere. So good evening to you. Wherever you're watching and listening to us tonight, you're very welcome. And starting today, millions of us will be paying higher national insurance contributions as part of the government's plans to raise billions for the NHS and social care. The 1.25% increase has been introduced despite pressure for it to be put off because, of course, we have a cost of living crisis going on. In summary, it means that annual earnings above £9,880 will be liable for just over 13% national insurance contributions. Got to remember, of course, though, that this rise breaks the 2019 Tory manifesto in which it pledged not to increase national insurance. Earlier on, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, defended the decision.
What we're doing today is unquestionably the right thing for our country. It's the right thing for the NHS because we've got here in the UK, we've now got backlogs, waiting lists of 6 million people. And that means there's everybody across the country knows somebody who's waiting for cancer treatment or some sort of procedure that is crucial for their health. And we've got to give our doctors and our nurses the wherewithal, the funding to deal with that.
Peter Edwards, Prime Minister, there with a lot of enthusiasm and gusto for his policy. The right thing to do, he repeats twice. Is it?
Well, there's Boris Johnson out there cheering a tax rise. It's a regressive tax rise, so that means it hits people on lower incomes more than people earning a higher sum. It's a punch in the guts for any household going through cost of living crisis, which is enormous. And it's not even going on social care. It's just going on supporting some of the underfunding of the NHS after COVID. But the reason year one of this new tax is being diverted to NHS waiting lists is because of a decade or more of underfunding of the NHS.
And also because of massive lockdowns that battered the NHS. Lee Jones, your thoughts?
I think most of that is not correct, as I understand it. So normally it would be true that raising national insurance rates would be a regressive way to raise tax. That means that poorer people would pay more as a proportion of their income than rich people. But you've got to remember that this increase in the national insurance rate that's happening now is being followed in July in an increase in the threshold at which you pay national insurance. So the result will be that anyone earning less than £35,000 a year will see a fall in national insurance contributions this financial year. So the overall revenue that will be raised will be nearly 11 billion, and 5.4 billion of this will be spent on social care. So it's also not true to say that none of it's going on social care. My view is that you don't have to tax incomes to fund social care. You can actually just create money to do it. So it's not necessary to do it, but it is necessary to fund social care. There is a social care funding crisis in this country. This is the way they've chosen to do it. The result of it won't actually be regressive. So I think at least they're doing something to tackle what is a looming crisis for our elderly population.
I don't suspect that at all. I think it is regressive. Do you think poorer people will be better off or worse off as a result?
Well, he's just said, when it comes specifically to national insurance, if you earn less than 35 grand, you'll be better off when we talk exclusively about national insurance.
Well, I don't think you say it definitively because we don't know what inflation is going to be next month or next month. But we do know that inflation is raging and inflation is not going to drop back to zero. Yeah,
but come on, we can't live in a magical land basing everything on what's the future going to hold. If you look at the rates as they stand today, with the thresholds as they stand today, as Lee's just said, below 34, I think it is, better off. More than 34, worse off. Lucy, your thoughts?
My thoughts basically, I think, would have to be on some of the comments that Sajid David made about how much money is going to be collected and how we actually develop and find the funding for those sort of holes that have been created by COVID and that £250 billion that's been spent on COVID longer term. The issues that I find of particular interest is he said that, yes, you can only do this through borrowing and raising taxes, but ultimately the issue here is not, how, but when. And that's my biggest point here is that are we really in a position to be able to afford it right now? Can we push it back? Can we make sure that we reduce tax in the short term to stimulate growth, to be able to rise the GDP of ordinary people, to increase the income of ordinary people, and then perhaps introduce other taxation at a later date? Although personally, I don't think any taxation is the appropriate way to go forward, but instead to rejuvenate and to stimulate that economy to make sure that we can afford some of the holes that have been created by COVID.
Yeah, I have to say, I do agree that we have to do something to fund social care, but I would also say that the timing of it is a bit lame. The Dilnot report was commissioned, I think, in 2010 by Cameron. Even up until that point, the can had been kicked down the road a long time with social care. This has been an issue for years and years and years. So for me, personally, a couple more years probably wouldn't make that much of a difference. But nonetheless, you must agree that we need to raise more money, though, to fix the issue of how we pay for our care in older life. It's an existential question that I think you're right to say governments of all stripes have failed to fix. I absolutely believe, and so does the independent IFS, that today's tax rise is a regressive rise. But I think, to go to your point, there probably is a case for having something like a royal commission where you take it out of the hands of politicians. The worry about that is
you'd have further delay, and it has been kicked around for 10 to 20 years. So if you had a Royal Commission, which would probably be my preference.
What does that mean? Just explain what you mean by that and what it would look like.
The government would appoint a group of experts, and that would be from all the relevant industries. So, of course, that's finance, civil servants, GPs, social care, NHS, so on and so on. People that don't have partisan political affiliations, get them to look at all the issues that we've only just, touched upon, really. It would be an incredibly long process, almost like a government inquiry, but they'd be independent, they'd be skilled, and they wouldn't be tied to the electoral cycle.
That sounds to me like another quango that's going to cost the taxpayer quite a lot more money. I would suggest that, we have voted for a government which is Conservative. The Conservative government should be making the calls, and it should be political.
As Michelle said, this is breaking a manifesto pledge, isn't it?
It is, but I also do actually admire the, I was going to say a word that I don't know if I can use at tea time, the courage, I should say. Yeah, I was going to use a completely different word. It rolled off my tongue almost, but I stopped myself because I don't want to get in trouble at tea time. But, the Tories have had the courage, shall we say, to actually grab a hold of this and do something. And it has been failed for years and years and years. I don't know why we need a Royal Commission of random experts to tell us what we already, I could do it for them for free. It'll take me 10 seconds. You ain't got enough money to fund social care. We're all living longer. You've got massive problems. I would tell them that for free in an instant. I don't know why we need long
why
studies.
Don't we have
because
you,
nobody wants to
I'll sort it out, Lucy, yeah.
Nobody wants to take responsibility. That's the issue. All this call for technocrats, for non-elected people to take decisions, it's because we have elected politicians that don't want to take responsibility for decisions. In this country, we have an elected democracy, thank God. And people voted for Brexit, for example, because they want a government that actually listens to them and enacts their wishes. So it is not, I think, appropriate to refer issues like this to experts and kick the can down the road again. We elect governments to solve social problems. We should critique their failure to solve many other social problems, and we should hold them to account. And we shouldn't expect experts to do their job for us. And just to be clear, the figures that I quoted earlier on were from the IFS. So the IFS is clear that when you take into account the raising of the threshold, this is not a regressive taxation move. If you're earning below £35,000 a year, you end up paying less in national insurance contributions.
What's your solution?
My preferred solution, rather than national insurance tax hikes, is either for a taxation on wealth, a modest tax on wealth, because we tend to try to raise far too much revenue from income, which hits actually people towards the bottom of society more heavily, rather than people at the very top of society who hold and get most of their money through wealth, through shares,
Are you talking like capital appreciations or dividend,
land, stocks and shares, those kinds of things. That would be my preference. It's also possible for the state to simply create fiat money. So the state in this country has created, for example, in the last few years to deal with the pandemic, nearly £300 billion out of thin air to spend on the pandemic. In the previous years, it pumped hundreds of billions of pounds into the financial system under the heading of quantitative easing. The government is not limited in the amount of money that it can create to solve social problems. It's only limited by the productive capacity of the economy.
But some would argue that quantitative easing has downsides as well. But Lucy, I can see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these suggestions are concepts that I don't think are in the benefit for ordinary people, mainly because it undermines the concept of ownership for ordinary people. If you're somebody who's climbed out of, a low income and you finally made it into that middle income and you're earning 50 grand, these taxes are going to mean that you lose almost £754 in one go today, which is, something for somebody who's, come from a lower economic background into this situation. For me, I feel that there's an element here where you don't have that ownership of your own wealth. How is it that the government is, the better placed person to spend your money? Therefore, I think the reduction of tax to increase and generate further revenue and make a bigger slice, a bigger pie for everyone to take a bigger slice of, I think is of interest to ordinary people, and actually encourage that ownership, encourage that concept of having something of your own and the ability to spend it through your own personal opinion of how that should be spent.
Sounds quite reasonable, don't it, Peter?
I'm worried about having more quantitative easing because that was meant to be a one-off response to a one-off crisis of the financial meltdown in 2008. We don't want that to become business as usual. And I think the issue about social care is that's going to be a problem, or certainly a cost. I hope it's not a problem, but a cost for every generation and every government forever. So QE is a bit of a one-off solution for something that will always be with us.
What do you think about the concept that the wealthy should contribute more to things like the NHS, etc.?
Although it does happen, I'm a bit nervous about singling out certain groups and for taxation, and governments of all stripes have tended to be absolutely battered by the media when they've suggested such a thing. But as the other panellists have hinted, there's only a few ways that you pay for something this big, which is either borrowing more, which is not attractive, or raising taxes, doing some financial engineering like QE, or making a cost saving, i.e. a cut elsewhere.
It does seem to me, sometimes I get the sense often, never mind sometimes, often, that everyone seems to want everything but not pay for it. And I believe that that is like quite cloud cuckoo land. So I'm looking at the King's Fund here. In 2019 to 2020, the average cost of a local authority-funded care home place for someone over the age of 65 was £679 a week. I mean, that will have shot up, I'm sure, if we was to do it for last year, this year, perhaps. And I always kind of hear this chorus of tax the rich more, tax the wealthy. And then I think to myself, but hang on a second, because the more someone earns, the more likely they are to have things like private health insurance and thus be a lesser drain on the NHS. So I actually don't think that concept of tax the rich more for this, I don't even think that's fair. Do you all agree?
I think thinking about the state as a service delivery agency that you're paying for and you get something out of is the wrong approach. So I don't have any children, but I pay a high rate of tax so that the nation's children can be educated. That's the price of living in a civilized society. The people that have colossal amounts of wealth, and that's what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about relieving the tax burden on middle-income earners, people that just get into tax brackets that haven't changed for years, that used to signify somebody being really rich, now just signifies somebody being, moderately prosperous in the southeast or something like that. Refocusing tax on the wealthy means targeting those who are benefiting disproportionately from the current social arrangements, which allow them to acquire disproportionate amounts of wealth. We don't have equal chances in life. Society is skewed to provide disproportionate benefits to some people. It is right that we claw back some benefits from those people to support those social arrangements.
I could start a whole new topic there, because you've just said we don't have equal chances in life. I actually think we do. We have equal chances. We don't have equal outcomes, but we have equal opportunities.
We certainly don't. And
I was just about to say, but this is a topic for another day, because I've been told I need to go for a break, but I just had to pick you up there because I think that is a fascinating topic, and I'm going to make a note of it to self for another day. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think of some of the things that you've heard today? Do you agree that the Tories are right to raise the national insurance now? Don't forget, of course, the threshold is lifting in July. I think it's a bit weird, by the way, why they've kind of raised the rate now and wait till July to raise the threshold. But I'm sure they've got a logic and a plan for that. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about NATO, Ukraine and sanctions. What's been going on today? I'll have the latest and a debate on that. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a reminder as to who my panel is keeping me company tonight. Lucy Harris, who's a former Conservative MEP, Dr Lee Jones, who's a Professor of Political Economy and International Relations, and Peter Edwards, who's the former editor of Labour List. Lots of your comments coming in on that last topic. I'll be reading some of those out in just a second. But for now, I want to just look at Ukraine. The country's Deputy Prime Minister has urged residents living in Kharkiv, Luhansk and Donetsk to evacuate as fears grow that Russia will intensify attacks there. It comes as America imposes sanctions on the Russian President Vladimir Putin's adult daughters. It's also targeted Russian banks following allegations of Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Meanwhile, there's an ongoing NATO meeting in Brussels where General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg warned the world that it must be prepared for a long conflict in Ukraine.
We have seen no indication that President Putin has changed his ambition to control the whole of Ukraine and also to rewrite the international order. So we need to be prepared for a long haul. We need to support Ukraine, sustain our sanctions, and strengthen our defenses and our deterrence. Because this can last for a long time and we need to be prepared for that.
Sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. Dr Lee, do they make any difference?
Well, they can inflict economic pain without extracting any political gain. And that is what is currently happening with the sanctions on Russia. So it's not that they're having no economic effect, they are. Inflation is currently running at 24% because the Russian currency has collapsed and about 70% of Russian consumables are imported. There's been a run on the banks. The projections are that Russian GDP will contract by about 10%. And the longer term sanctions will also bite. Russia can't be completely cut off and cut off at the knees because its energy exports are needed in Europe. And with energy prices spiking, that's actually leading to more income for Russia. But if we look at the political side of things, approval for Putin has increased by 12 percentage points to 83%. This is a level of approval that Western leaders could only dream of.
Yeah, but hang on a second, because I reference this frequently, and every time I reference this, they say people will get in touch and they'll do it in a second. They'll go, Michelle, what are you even talking about? You know, who is this? Who is conducting this approval rating? Is it actually believable?
Yeah,
is it coerced?
No, I don't think so. I think obviously during wartime, opinion polling becomes quite difficult to conduct, and there will be an impact of the conflict. But the figure I've just quoted is from the Levada Institute in Russia, which is a highly respected polling agency and is often referenced in academic research. So that's the approval rating, 83%. Opinion polling also shows a majority of Russians blame NATO for the conflict. So it's not likely that in the short term, at least, people are coming out on the streets against Putin and against the war in large numbers. And there's very little sign of any elite fracturing within the regime. You know, it's not as if, you know, ministers are resigning or particular parts of the party, the ruling party, United Russia, are splitting off or anything like that. So at the moment, sanctions are hurting. They're definitely hurting ordinary Russians. But at the moment, for the time being, it's being channeled into spine stiffening and a kind of what we call in academic circles a rally round the flag effect.
Rally round a flag effect. Peter Edwards?
Well, I think we're well off the stage at which there's any kind of unrest in Russia, and I think there are different reasons for that, as Lee indicated. Some are a bit of a bubble effect, a rallying around the Russian identity. I think another one is really huge manipulation of the media and the actual information that ordinary Russian folk... Remember, our quarrel is not with ordinary Russian folk, it's with the government, but the ordinary Russian folk don't get information. I was very intrigued to see Boris Johnson again trying to speak in Russian directly to the people of Russia. And similarly, why are Russian government ministers not resigning? I think, sadly, it's the same reason why they're not resigning in North Korea, and that's fear.
But I do think it's interesting, though, when people, and they do it often, they'll call out like to quote your word there, the manipulation of media in Russia. But actually, you know, what you see in Ukraine, for example, is Zelensky basically outlawed 11 opposition parties, got rid of private media organisations, brought together the existing media channels under one umbrella, United News or whatever it's called. And he himself said that in times of conflict, martial law, etc., controlling information is key. He sees that as a key strategy. So yes, Russia are doing that, but also so are Ukraine.
But you've got to be clear, and I'm not sure it's 11. I read, you might have more up-to-date information, I read Zelensky...
I'm always right, Peter.
...banning 2 ultra-right parties in Ukraine. But the point about Russia is, I'm afraid that the media has been manipulated for years. This hasn't happened in the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Lucy?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree that there is an incredible amount of propaganda within Russia. Putin's regime, I mean, I think it was on the front page of the Times, not too sure, got to check that today, of a man who was protesting against Putin's regime and who was shot dead and left in the street as an example. Would you stand up to that if you were being interviewed by a polling company suggesting potentially the one that you are quoting figures from? Would you also be somebody who wants to put their name down and say that they are against Putin's regime when we are in such serious situations of war? Probably not. So I think we should take anything that comes out of Russia with a massive pinch of salt. But, you know, why aren't sanctions working? Well, actually...
Do you just apply that to one side? Because propaganda is a key tool of a war.
I also think fear is an element as well, and that is something that we don't have within the UK. It's something that we don't have within Western countries of our democracies, because we are democracies. So I'd suggest fear is a critical element of making sure that the propaganda is actually a functioning strategy for a regime like Putin's.
Michelle, may I add to that briefly, because I think we all agree propaganda has been part of war for centuries, and obviously there's more media with internet and social media than ever. But I think war also forces choice on all of us. And for example, we either accept that innocent people have been gunned down in Ukraine.
Oh, absolutely. No one would deny that.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not suggesting you are. Or we don't accept that. And I think all of us, and I think all people in Britain would accept innocent people are being killed. And I would describe that as murder in Ukraine. But clearly, you wouldn't have a debate of this nature on a Russian TV show because of the controls that we're all discussing.
Yeah.
Lee? Sorry.
I mean, that's obviously true. I don't think there's any... I mean, there's no real dispute about the nature of the Putin administration. There's also, I think, very little dispute that it does attain widespread public support, and that's because of what happened to Russia in the 1990s when the economy collapsed under shock therapy and oligarchs were just plundering the state and running rampant. And Putin has brought back a sense of order, some economic growth, increase in income, a sense of national pride. That's why he is broadly supported in Russia. It's not a myth. Even if we can quibble over particular percentage points and the accuracy of polls, I'm afraid he does command popular support in Russia for the time being. I would like to go back, though, to this talk about a long war in Ukraine. I mean, we have to hope that is not the case, that the West is trying to gird its loins for a long, crushing war in Ukraine. We've already been over 1,000 civilians killed in Ukraine, over 4 million refugees, and a projected loss of GDP this year of 47%. I mean, this is in a country that has yet to regain 1990 levels of GDP. after the collapse of its own economy after the
Isn't it the only post-Soviet state that hasn't yet recovered its levels?
Yes, it is. And so, Ukraine is already a very poor post-Soviet country. It's being absolutely devastated. The people of Ukraine are suffering enormously. We have all to hope, we have all to do whatever we can to avoid this becoming a long war. This is not something that we should think is an attractive option or a good strategic course of action at all.
And by the way, Lucy, we talk about sanctions and financial restrictions, etc., but it's also a fact that the EU has spent 35 billion euros since the invasion, by the way, so I'm only talking like the last 40 days or whatever it is, 41 days, buying energy from Russia.
Well, precisely right. Germany in particular, as Lee suggested already, has been the main country that has been buying a lot of this oil and gas from Russia. Obviously, it's incredibly dependent on it. And we talked about decisions earlier on with Peter. And, Germany does have a decision. Germany has a decision to cut off their dependency with Russia, and yes, that does mean some critical decisions for the German people. But this is in return for a greater possibility that we can protect or even diminish the concept of a longer war with the Ukraine.
But do you think the German government's primary responsibility should be to the well-being of its population? Or externally?
I think if we look at to the extent, I think that's a pretty good word to apply here. I mean, what will the German people be going without? What are they going to miss out on? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, it's pretty clear.
But in return, what would the Ukrainians be missing out on? And that's their lives. And I think that's a pretty substantial and a pretty obvious thing to decide.
I mean, Europe relies on Russia for about a quarter of its oil and about 45% of its gas. So the EU is slapping sanctions on Russian coal exports, which is not insignificant because about half of the EU coal imports come from Russia, and still coal comprises about 15% of energy supply in the EU. So that's not insignificant. But the dependence of the European economies on Russian gas and oil is enormous. Yeah. And you cannot simply switch that off overnight without pushing Western Europe into an economic depression, not just a recession, but a depression. It would plunge European economies into complete chaos. It would lead to us being unable to heat our homes. In winter, people wouldn't be able to heat their homes. You would be talking about people freezing to death. I mean, this is not something you can just flick a switch. There are real consequences to this. And I think Michelle's right. The primary responsibility of the German government is to the German electorate. Yes, it's got to try and pursue the interests of those people in terms of the creation and pursuit of its foreign policy, but it's got also to look after the welfare of its own people. So pursuing a long-term disengagement from Russia and a shift away from dependence on Russian oil and gas is probably wise for all kinds of reasons, but it can't just snap its fingers and do it overnight.
So what's coming out tomorrow will be the government's energy security strategy.
The long-awaited energy strategy,
well, it's been hurried along, obviously, because of the war. But this will also signify to Russia that we are preparing an alternative to a reliance on their energy sources. It will also start the conversation with the European Union. How are we going to live without Russian oil and gas, which is something that they might not want us to do. And I remember, I think back in the 1970s, when there was the oil crisis in the Middle East, as soon as the oil pipes were shut off towards the West, instantly we started to diversify our reliance on different sources of energy. So this won't be a positive thing for Russia. It will sort of build on top of them to show that we're actually creating something that will manage the effect on Russian gas and dependability on that. But also, look at other stuff that we're doing more broadly in the global stance of things. We're starting to form an alliance with Australia, with the US to create hypersonic missiles, which is, an unprecedented move for a collaboration in that AUKUS mindset. So that unification of with countries that are competent at creating these missiles is a great show of endeavour to Russia, and they will be looking at that.
Well, there you go. Let me know your thoughts. I do find it fascinating, by the way. All these conversations that I seem to be hearing coming out all the time are about more money, more weapons, more this, more that. The thing that I don't seem to be hearing more of is how we're going to resolve this. Why are there not more calls, more pushing for peace talks to get Zelensky and Putin together? There seems to be more of everything but that. What am I missing? Get in touch with me. Let me know your thoughts on that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs. Now, today, divorce laws, new divorce laws come into effect. They've been overhauled for the first time in 50 years. This puts an end to the blame game for couples who want to split amicably. Married couples in England and Wales will be able to start divorce proceedings without having to blame their partner. What do you think to this, Lucy? It's been criticised by many. People are saying, well, hang on a second, because marriage is this kind of, this sanctity. It should be protected. It should be difficult to leave.
Yes, well, I'm not married yet, if my other half is watching.
Hey, if you're watching, hint, yes.
That's a pretty strong...
That's a pretty big hint, isn't it?
There is subtlety here, Lucy. I don't blame you.
But, I think there is an element of what is a marriage, how do we confront marriage, how do we think about marriage? And certainly in the past, marriage has been something that we've used either for biological reasons, so that you can protect the mother and the child when it comes to, relationships, and how do you make sure that there is an element of protection for the mother and in a financial sense. So biological and financial sense, that it's always been there and embedded within society. But of course, with with the pill and with the ability to manage your own sexuality, that's moved on to having a broader conversation around marriage and what does it mean now. And I think, it's been liberalised to the point where we now have laws like this coming in, which I think personally undermines a higher ideal that marriage and personal relationships should strive for. And I think that should always be something that we all look for, is having that connection and that rapport in relationships. And if it can be flicked off with just a letter from yourself or from your partner, I think that undermines how important marriage is. So I'm not entirely convinced with this new law.
Peter, are you married?
I'm not married, and I think the jury is out on what's happening today. I think marriage is a good, whether you believe in that as I do, out of religious faith or social good or economic good or just a stability of children if you have them. I think marriage is a good, but I think the jury's out on whether this is a bad thing, because separation is horrific, and if it can, and we're all emotional creatures, we've all got feelings, so if it can encourage separating couples to do so amicably, there could be some positives to it. So, I think we've all got to be, in my case, we've all got to be careful of just bashing something because it's the Tories, but if where there's a relationship breakdown, and there can be an orderly or an amicable separation where both sides have given up, that maybe safeguard the children from some of the acrimony, I think that could be a positive.
Oh, I'll tell you what's positive. Karen's written in while she's listening to you, and this is, I'm telling the truth, Peter. You can see it saying, tell Peter I would marry him. Oh, there you go, Karen, Peter. See, I could come to the wedding. I could be bridesmaid. Lee, you're married. What do you think to these new rules?
I think we've got to look at why the change has come about, and it's been something that people have been calling for quite a long time. So there's two different ways to get divorced. One is if somebody's at fault. You say, for example, my husband has committed adultery.
Seems like you've looked into this.
No,
yeah.
I try to do some research before coming on the show.
Well done, we like that.
If there is no fault divorce, so nobody has committed, adultery or unreasonable behaviour, you've got to spend 2 years apart, even if both parties agree to a divorce, and 5 years apart if one partner objects to the divorce. And the result of that is that many people who have accepted that their relationship is simply not working. You know, their relationship has broken down. It's better for them and perhaps also better for their children that they are separated. It means it's difficult for them to move on. It's difficult for them to agree the terms of their separation in law. It's difficult for them to remarry. And there is a strong incentive to get past this, to invent blame, to speed things up, which can be very difficult and damaging and divisive, and it's not necessarily good. So I think it's a positive change in the law. And I don't think we have to worry that this change in the law is going to lead to some, breakdown of the institution of marriage. I think, marriage has been a declining institution for many years that have got really nothing to do with government regulation, a lot more to do with changes in society, the kind of things that Lucy was talking about. And if you look at Australia, Australia has had a no-faults divorce law since 1975, and their divorce rates are about 4.5 times lower than the rates in the UK. So, and that's also true of some European countries as well. So I don't think the law is determinate here. I think the institution of marriage is basically a social institution. It's not really for the state to regulate it, in my view.
Matthew has written in saying, straight to the point, Matthew is, Dewbs, I think the new divorce laws are excellent. Who wants to carry a ball and chain if it's turned toxic? You do carry on. You carry on, but I won't read your second sentence out, but I get your point, Matthew. I've never been married nor divorced, but to me it seems the problems are not about the actual concept of the divorce, but the money side of it. Afterwards, everyone I've known that's been divorced, that has been the aspect that's caused the problem. So I wonder how these new laws will fix any of that, if indeed they would at all. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, you are what you eat and all that. The government is always trying to clamp down or help with obesity. Doesn't seem to be doing that much of a good job, but today's the latest idea. Calories on menus of the big chains, the big restaurants. Would you look? Would you pay attention to what the calories are on your dinner? Would it dictate what you ordered or what you didn't? Let me know your thoughts and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Every night at 11 on GBNews, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. A reminder as to who my panel is tonight: Lucy Harris, who's a former Conservative MEP, Dr Lee Jones, who's a Professor of Political Economy and International Relations, and Peter Edwards, who's the former editor of Labour List. Now, if you're going out tonight to a restaurant, what drives your choice? What makes you pick what you're going to have? Do you just sit there and go, oh, I fancy this, I fancy that? What about if there were calories listed next to your food? Because from today, restaurants, cafes and takeaways with more than 250 staff must print how many calories are on their meals. This will be on their menus, their websites, on their delivery platforms, etc., etc. This is all part of the government's plans to tackle obesity and, crucially, the increase in type 2 diabetes. Apparently, this is what it's going to take to make us create healthier choices for ourselves. But as we've just been discussing in the break, McDonald's have been doing this for quite some time, haven't they? I think places like Starbucks as well, you know, now that I think about it, I'm sure they have them on their menu. Peter, would this make a difference to your ordering choices?
It's got cheaper in real terms over the years. It is ultimately a rarity or a treat. Most of the meals we consume are either in our home or in our workplace with food we've often prepared ourselves. So if there's an obesity crisis, or if there's any person that's obese, it's because of food they've cooked at home or just ordinary food purchased in a supermarket, and all of this has nutritional information on the back already. I think we'd all agree obesity is it can be very sad, it can be dangerous, it can be life-limiting, and it can be very costly for the NHS and therefore taxpayers. And I think probably a lot of dealing with that comes down to things like public awareness, good government communication, good communication from your GP and schools as well.
Lee?
Well, if the government wants to tackle type 2 diabetes, then meddling with the menus at restaurants seems like a rather strange way to go about it, because if you're poor, you're more than you're about 2.5 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes than if you're wealthy. And of course, poor people very rarely eat out in restaurants, so this is not a very well-targeted measure to tackle type 2 diabetes. I mean, the provision of more information is okay. You know, who can argue against more information? You can make a more informed choice. But I don't think it's going to make a great deal of difference. The relationship is very tight between poverty on the one hand and obesity on the other. And so if you want to tackle obesity and all the health problems that come with that, you have to tackle poverty.
Lucy?
Yeah, no, I would agree that I think it's an overreach from the government. I think it's an overreach from probably civil servants who don't really have much to do. You know, a lot of the times, you know, it's people who have a bit more money, who have a bit more finance, who can eat out, and it's often, you know, the middle classes who have that opportunity to do so. But that's not probably where the issue is, considering they're more focused on healthy eating. They're looking at how they can, you know, do their next, detox and whatnot. So I don't think that's entirely something that is going to be of great concern. I mean, I welcome it because I find it very difficult to follow a diet if there isn't some indication of how many calories is in something. But that's me personally. But no, in general, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference.
But what do we think to this notion that kind of, because I hear this often, where, and you just made it as well, Lee, you're saying yourself then about when people are poorer, it's those people that are eating the worst type of food. But I don't get this, because we grew up with no money and we had things cooked from scratch. And actually, I think about things like, I don't know, I mean, other supermarkets are available, obviously, but I think about like your Aldi special buys and your Super Sixes and all of your kind of, your good fruit and veg and all those kind of things. So I don't really get this concept that you know, if you're poor, you can only eat bad food. Am I missing something, Peter?
I don't think at all that it's if you're poor, you can only eat bad food. But I think we will accept, for example, some food that's bad for you is cheap. And also think about maybe households that are poor. So those people might be having more stressful jobs, more physically demanding jobs. They might be single-parent households. They might have long commutes. There might be multiple children coming in from different schools in different places. So I think there might be other strains on the family above and beyond what's in the wallet.
Is that fair? By the way, I must say, I thought I was hearing voices in my own head, so I did, during this conversation, but it turns out I am not hearing voices in my own mind. You lots are hearing them as well. I have no idea who the random guy is that's talking over this debate. We're trying to shut him up as we speak. Lee, your thoughts? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously not everybody who is poor eats unhealthily. And not everybody who is rich eats healthily. It's not to say that is biologically determined or determined entirely by, what's in your wallet. But anybody who goes to a supermarket can see that a large bag of frozen chips, for example, is a lot cheaper than buying fresh fruit and vegetables. Fresh fruit and vegetables are actually quite expensive. And people's ability to prepare them for large families, for example, is quite limited when you're on a very low budget.
Come off it.
No,
so you just said someone's ability to prepare food is restricted if they... I don't think it's ability, I think it's desire. I think it's people's desire to prepare food from scratch is limited.
I think it's not as simple as that. There are lots of people in this country, unfortunately, on very low incomes that would struggle to feed their family properly by cooking fresh food from scratch. I mean, I'll take you back to... Your attitude is very similar to that of Jamie Oliver, right, who launched this big campaign against turkey Twizzlers and chips and so on, and patronising...
Yeah, school lunches, wasn't it?
Sorry?
School lunches he was doing?
It was school lunches, but also, I mean, you might remember that the Duchess of York also descended on a council estate in Hull to teach people how to cook healthy food, because obviously it's just their lack of desire that is the problem, their lack of understanding. So she'll be able to educate them. And she came in for a very rude awakening when she realised just how little money these people had and how difficult it was to buy fresh food to feed large growing families. So I don't think we should moralise or blame the poor for being in a situation of extreme poverty. If we were to tackle poverty, I think this would definitely improve the health of the nation. Many countries that are much more equal than ours don't have the kinds of public health burdens that we have in this country.
I'm not moralising. I'm coming at this from a real-life experience that I'm one of 6 children, and my mum might be watching this, and if she is, she'll be mortified. But I remember we used to eat, for example, what we called chicken pie. This is a bit embarrassing, can't believe I'm about to admit it, but we didn't have no chicken in it because we couldn't afford chicken. So our chicken pie was basically potatoes, carrots, peas. My mum used to make a pastry to go on the top and a bit of watered-down chicken soup. That was what we had, and we loved it. We absolutely adored it. So for me, I just feel, of course, there's a thing of poverty, of course there's working poor and all the rest of it, but I also think that there is a situation where a lot of people, they don't want to create stuff from scratch. They don't want to sit and make and bake and all the rest of it. And I think that's kind of almost as life used to be. And I think it's an attitudinal change that people want to go out and buy quick convenience food. What do you think? Am I out of order? Am I making it up? Am I doing the equivalent of, who was it, Kate, going and patronising the people?
No, Fergie, Duchess of York.
Was it? Oh, well, there you go. What do you think about that? Lots of you getting in touch on marriage, by the way. Seems to be a real divided opinion there. I've got to say, the people that don't seem to agree with it. Yeah, I was about to say, I think the people that are less agreeing with it all are the people that haven't been married or have got divorced. But I'm sure some of you are very happily married. Let me know if that is indeed your situation. That is all we've got time for tonight. Some of your messages, by the way, I do read them all. You do make me chuckle. You do, I have to say. Anyway, Lee, Lucy, Peter, thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you at home for your company. Have a great evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's going to be increasingly windy through the next 12 to 24 hours, turning colder with that wind coming from the north and northwest, and we'll see rain in some places, hill snow. The low pressure responsible for the wind is moving close to Northern Ireland, Western Scotland during the rest of Wednesday. Tight isobars on the southern flank of that low will bring gales to parts of northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, into these Irish sea coasts of North Wales, northwest England. Risk for some exposed parts of 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts, perhaps a touch more in some of the most exposed spots. risk of disruption from that wind. But elsewhere, the wind is bringing colder air south. Some hill snow possible for Caithness, Sutherland, the Grampians, a few centimetres above 300 metres. That could also bring disruption first thing Thursday. The rain and hill snow in the north breaks into showers, and after a small amount of rain in the far south, that clears away during Thursday, and actually many places brighten up through the day. But there will still be some showers pushing southwards, a mix of rain and hail at lower levels, snow over the hills. And it'll feel cold in the brisk wind coming from the north, 7 to 9 Celsius across northern parts of the country, 12 to 13 in the far south. Into Thursday evening, the skies clear fairly widely, the winds drop down a touch, and as a result, a frost will form in many places, particularly southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northern England, North Wales and the Midlands. In the far south, it turns cloudy and could be a few spots of rain along the south coast to wake up to on Friday morning. In the far north, we'll keep those wintry showers going. Again, a mix of rain and hail at lower levels, sleet and snow over any higher ground. Now, those showers increasingly affecting much of Scotland, Northern Ireland through Friday. The rain in the far south clears away. And for many, it's looking like a bright day, with clearing skies then into the start of the weekend. A widespread frost for Saturday, but Saturday should be mostly dry and bright.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.